University. There are Amitab Matoo not an here today because after many years of blackout in the Kashmir University, after Eminent Series died, nobody invited me here for a decade. It was Jammu University that invited me during the last 3 years to make many speeches. I told Jammu people that it required a Kashmiri Brahmin to become Vice Chancellor of the Jammu University, to have the courage to invite an infidel speak in the Jammu University where nobody had invited me before. So, at the time for return of Punjabi University and open this university up to new breezes, new winds that are buffeting Kashmir from every side, and to have Amitab Matoo here. He asked me to talk, I always do, not to provoke, but even to antagonize, because 80 years of history of education in Kashmir must begin with a shock to all of you. And the first shock is, with due apology to Amitab Matoo Sahib and the lineage of Brahmins who have monopolized education for 100 years, that it was left to my community, another infidel community, the Shias, to produce the first matriculate in Jammu and Kashmir. This is history. I have to speak about the 20th century. And before the beginning of the 20th century, it was my mother's father, Agha Hussain, Khan Bahadur Agha Hussain, who went to Rawalpindi in the Tonga, 203 miles, not kilometers, to sit for the middle standard and matriculation examination of the Punjab University. "70 years later, a distinguished minister of the Kashmir government asked me to shift a center because I was chairman from 2 miles nearer for this copy past the matriculation examination. The nearest center of the Punjab University for dilapidated old Kashmir was Rawalpindi. And 2 people went in a Tonga, Vedlal Zuchi and Agha Hussain. Unfortunately, Vedlal Zuchi died young. His son was my teacher, brilliant man, and Jantina Zuchi is known to all of you as Vedlal's great lieutenant, etc., information, etc., editor of Kashmir, and another brilliant man. But Agha Hussain was not only brilliant. Agha Hussain, incidentally, was my grandfather, but that has nothing to do with the matter. For historical purposes, what has to be recorded is that he was the first person to have learned English in Kashmir. And you have to refer to Mr. Folk, I forget his name, 2 volumes on Kashmir. He says because Agha Hussain had learned English, therefore he moved forward in the ladder of bureaucracy. So beginning, the Dogras were not very fond of Muslims, and Maharaja Pratap Singh was very, very communal. But because his royal official was my paternal great-grandfather, Hakim Ali Naki, he took this little boy with him to the palace and said, he knows a little English. So very grudgingly, Maharaja Pratap Singh appointed him as a Naib Tehsil on 50 rupees or whatever, and 2 years training, Shagir Kashi Kari, 2 years training. But there were English people here, and recognizing his merit, he soon started rising to DC and settlement officer under Walter Lawrence, all that, and finally, the matriculate. Hari Singh held him in such regard that in the first High Court established in Jammu and Kashmir, he made Agha Hussain a judge of the High Court, 1928, 27, whatever is the date. And he didn't make him a pure matriculate, a judge of the High Court. But on the other side, in the photograph that I have, which I gave to the High Court to build their history, they didn't have the photograph, is both Raisani, BCL from Oxford, Bachelor of Civil Law. And in the center is Kamar San, who used to argue in the High Court in law, along with the great poet Iqbal. And then my grandfather was promoted as a minister in 1929. Hari Singh saw to it that he was made Home and Judicial Minister over the High Court. Such was his acumen and work, and he was a pure matriculate. So history begins with a little pardonable that Muslims are not as defunct of IQ as we were led to believe for many, many years. I'll soon develop other heartburns for you so that you see this 100 years in a different manner. But seeing the tragedy of Kashmir, the British helped the Dogra to appoint Sir John Shaw as an investigator on the condition of education in Kashmir. So in 1906 appeared Minute on Education of Mr. Shah, describing the abysmal backwardness of the 94% or 90% Muslims living in Kashmir. So just like one swallow doesn't make the summer, Agha doesn't make us feel that Muslims are rising. Peculiar of a happier home and an accident. This was recorded because Amitab Ghosh has put it in a book, and this is to make you laugh a little, because if I continue speaking, only Amitab Matoo and Vice Chancellor can tell me to sit down. This is important because every family rises in the world because of an accident. So when my son was dying, the poet Agha Ashraf Ali, he said to Amitab Matoo, Amitab Ghosh, who is a professor of English and a great novelist and anthropologist, he said to him, now mark carefully, this is being recorded, the fortunes of our family were hanging by a fart. Those who understand what fart means, they will understand presently. In 1872, Maharaja Ranbir Singh was going in his Parinda road by 24 people to Manasbal. Somewhere near Navakadar, where we used to live, my ancestors, the Maharaja developed a wind colic. In Kashmir you call it a koonj. How is koonj? Hawa goes band. And they stopped the boat and they ran into that bedraggled little village and found a Hakim there. Hakim Bakar, my grandfather's great-grandfather, 1872. He was brought there and he saw his pulse, saw his tongue, and gave him, I don't know, horse salt or camel salt or elephant salt, whatever he gave him. But the relief of the winds produced clouds and ripples on the river which are still bubbling there. The result was that Hakim Bakar became royal official to Maharaja Ranbir and the Agha family rose.
Excellent.
His son Hakim Ali became royal official to Maharaja Pratap Singh. So this brilliant, like all other brilliant people who die unknown because they have no opportunity. Remember, intelligence is the same thing as opportunity. When opportunity is given, 10 people who have the same education that Mr. Riyaz Punjabi, Agha Ashraf Ali and Amitab Matoo had, 2 of them will do as well, if not better. That opportunity came only to him, the first man who learned English and became a Naib Tahsildar. Today, people who don't know English become ministers directly. Which is also a question of Kashmir's rising democracy. That was Shah's village. But nearer time, in 1938, a very brilliant man, Gopalaswamy Iyengar, became the Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. And he invited Dr. Zakir Hussain That is how my troubles began in life. On the Reorganization Education Committee, published in 1939. Now that is a landmark, a very important report. It is only an adaptation of the Varda scheme of basic education. But the fundamental thing there is, which has been disregarded even by all the Kashmiri leaders, and in spite, without a dog barking, Kashmir has not found its mind, its heart, or its soul. When Principal Jiagal wrote to me a letter when I was in America, he said Kashmir will never find its soul until Kashmiri becomes the medium of instruction in the primary and middle schools. That has not happened. I hope with two brilliant people sitting here as Vice Chancellors. Vice Chancellors, Dr. Zakir Hussain used to say, in spite of all the Vice Chancellors, the no more Vice Chancellors, and the not yet Vice Chancellors, Gandhi will return to Indian education with vengeance. That is the key. 1939. 3 recommendations only made by Dr. Zakir Hussain. 1. Education between 7 and 14 must be free, universal and compulsory. 2. This education must be imparted in the mother tongue. There can be no compromise on that. Number 3, this education must center around and some work experience, a productive craft. The tragedy of India, because of what another Amitab, these Amitabs have eaten me up, but his name is slightly different. Nobel Fellow, the economic fellow, Amartya Sen. He talked about the monstrous inequity of the caste system. But with all the promise that India began like China, what has gone wrong? It is somehow that when the great son of India, the gospel of the great Buddha, started traveling to Ceylon and on the peripheries of Asia, those countries developed a healthy, egalitarian accent in their growth, an entitlement for the poor, which India did not. And so he said, how is India doing? 1965, New York Books, his article, breathtakingly wonderful, that India did not go as far as China did because this entitlement of education to the poor, of health to the poor, was missing. And the word is monstrous inequity. And in Kashmir, the monstrous inequity is that the mother tongue has been rejected. I would think we are not Kashmiris anymore. I always speak in Kashmiri nowadays, wherever I go. Another dear friend of mine, these things are being recorded and they must be recorded. One of the finest friends of mine happens to be wife of a very dear friend who is inviting me on Monday to preside somewhere, Mr. Chanji Bakshi. His wife was from the south. Her English was flawless. And I was director of training, so she said in the meeting, well, if the students don't understand English, so much the worse for them. So I said, let me deliver 3 lectures in Kashmiri in the College of Education on philosophy, psychology and sociology of education. I did. Not that I know the Kashmiri that Rahi Sahib knows or Nadim Sahib knew. But forget that. Whatever Dr. Zakir Hussain said, the most important thing is, you have 15 high schools, they are sufficient for your needs. Considering the backwardness of society, the ability of a society to absorb people who are educated as unemployed without learning anything, and big PhDs wanting to become Rahbar-e-Talim, it was left because of the critical eye that Riyaz Punjabi Sahib has developed by living for 16 years outside. The critical eye is developed when you leave your country. He has been speaking against the Kashmir government's policy of indiscriminate and indiscreet opening of colleges without a dog barking, without teachers, without rooms, without anything, and charging poor people 3,000 to 4,000 rupees a year. I mean, elections are elections, but this has become too much. It's like a joke. When I was called, Mir Qasim was in a tight spot. He was the chief minister. So I was summoned by N.K. Mukherjee, who was a Christian, and Dogra Sahib was a senior fellow, and Tirupati Dutt was a senior fellow. They were leftists. And they said, opening higher secondary schools. What was the scheme? And this is 1973, forget 39, 1774. I had to educate our masters, that is illiterate people who are our ministers. I said the following. I said, when freedom came with Sheikh Abdullah, we tried to open colleges at district levels. Baramulla, Sopur, Kathua, Anantnag. Now, 50 years later, we are detaching 11th and 12th from schools that go into high school. This is the time now to take the higher secondary school to the tahsil. And it was left to Rajiv Gandhi to have the brilliant idea of opening district residential schools all over India, so that the bright kids from the hinterland, the bright kids could come into those secondary schools where they were good teachers and the talented people can sprout and grow. But when I told, he was my friend, Mir Qasim Sahib, junior to me by 1 year, when he took me from the university and ruined my career and made me a director, I said, these are the 3 or 4 things I can do for you. May God bless him. He was very kind to me in more ways than one. He said, one tree is flooring, this is the one who comes. No, when Sheikh Sahib came in 75, he was having grapes, and he invited me. He had stopped copying. 75 March, and he made me chairman of the State Board of School Education here in the city. So I wanted to provoke him. I said to him, he didn't offer me a grape. He never offered anything to anybody in terms of intimacy, not at all, unlike Bakshi Sahib. But he said, the chancellor, that is Jaha Sahib, going to invite you. I don't want any concessions to be given, because the result was 8% that year in the matric examination. I don't want any concessions. So you can go and talk to L.K. Jaha because he is perturbed. What do you do? I said, sir, this is what I told Mir Qasim Sahib. And he said, well, what was that? Now, the lion of Kashmir was provoked. I said, the first thing is, long overdue, the great tragedy of education in India. In the engineering college, in the medical college, in other colleges, you have the semester system. And if a person doesn't pass in a subject, he passes in some subject and goes on, and he appears only in the carry-on subject. Why in the matriculation examination because of Lord Macaulay? A boy fails in all the 5 subjects because he has 2 marks left in mathematics. I said, everybody in the world says, the student who passes in some subjects, declare him to have passed. 2, 3, 4. Why should English be compulsory after freedom? Some people become patwaris, some people become constables. The languages for Urdu or Hindi or something, not English. But these people who have failed in English and metric, like distinguished bureaucrats, have learnt enough English to say, shut up and get out. That is the English required by the bureaucracy in Kashmir. Shut up, get out. So they can use that amount of English when required. But all the work in adalats everywhere by the third-rate clerk has to be done in our language. If he fails in English but passes in 4 subjects, he should be declared a matriculate, not to go to college, not to go to where English is required, but he is a matriculate. If a person fails in mathematics, he has learnt enough mathematics to ruin his domestic economy, enough. But he has passed in 4 subjects. He is a matriculate. He goes to college, doesn't take mathematics, but he wants to specialize in languages, in social sciences. Let him go on. So, although the examination has taken place under the old statutes, my joint secretary was one Gol Sahib. I don't know enough English to describe what happened to him. Wedded to bureaucratic red tape and etc. So we go to Zeldes on the don't you know that there is an Article 13/4 emergency powers of the chairman issue? So a poor boy of Kishtwar came to my mother, whose father was her servant. He said, "Sir, tell Agha Sahib to give me a job, because I have passed matriculation." The result was, Shahbaz Mir Motiache passed in Urdu to reappear in the 4 subjects. But everybody had been told, you have passed in something. And so I took him to the office, saw his result. I said, when you pass in the other 3 subjects that is required, then you can be appointed. But in spite of 8% result, the feeling of this Lord Macaulay's damned law, they wanted clerks for the bureaucracy, they must pass English and mathematics, was not required in New Television. So the challenge in education in 39, when Zakir Hussain made the committee form, the Naik Committee, Partha Sarthi, in 1973.